Tonight on Bridge City News, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has an update on how Ottawa is helping Canadians trapped with the coronavirus on a cruise ship near Japan. We speak with a professor from the University of Calgary about the dangers associated with cannabis products. And a $250,000 donation made to the U of L will offer employment opportunities for students with disabilities.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Ottawa is telling Canadians stranded in Wuhan, China, that their flight out of the city has been delayed by about 21 hours. Officials are blaming weather conditions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the government is also working with Japanese authorities as 251 Canadians are among thousands of people now quarantined on a cruise ship where many of the passengers are afflicted with the coronavirus. The ship is currently off the coast of Japan.
There is a narrow window given by the Chinese for flights into Wuhan, and the weather conditions were such that the plane couldn't take off, so everything's delayed by a day. We're hoping to have these families back on Friday. We understand for loved ones here in Canada, for the families over there, that it's extremely difficult. We are engaged with the Japanese government in terms of how we can provide support for the Canadians. We're trying to get more information about the situation right now, but we're very much engaged. And again, we want to reassure the families both on the cruise ship that we are alert and engaged in their issue. We are working very closely with the World Health Organization, and Dr. Theresa Tam, our public health officer, is up on all the latest research.
We do have a report now that says some Canadians may be leaving Wuhan, China on a U.S. plane. Health officials in BC said there is a new presumptive case of the coronavirus in their province. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry says the latest case is a woman who returned from visiting family in Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the virus. She's currently in isolation at home.
This is a woman in her 50s who lives in the Vancouver Coastal Health Region. She became ill a few days ago and was assessed in hospital, and the testing came back positive once again late last night. So Vancouver Coastal is working diligently today to get all of the details, starting last night and today, all of the details around this person. She has been in contact with family visitors from Wuhan and Hubei province. And she has a very small number of close contacts that are also being followed up with Vancouver Coastal today.
The Alberta Chief Medical Officer of Health says there are no probable or confirmed coronavirus cases in Alberta. Many health experts say the best way to protect yourself from viruses is still by washing your hands. Dr. Vivian Suttorp with Alberta Health Services says it's very important to prevent the spread of the viruses.
Prevention is quite similar for all the respiratory illnesses. Influenza, there's vaccine, and vaccine is still available. A note, if you've had one influenza strain and have been ill with it, you can still get the other strains that are circulating. That is a little bit unique this year, is that we have 3 different strains circulating all at the same time. So it's not too late to get your flu vaccine. Secondly, if you're sick, stay home. Or if your little one is sick with RSV, stay home and keep the germs at home and return back to work or to play once you're able to do so. Wash your hands really well. Hand washing, you can't undermine the importance of hand hygiene. Also, obviously, cough etiquette. If you're coughing, cough in your sleeve or in a tissue and wash your hands afterwards.
Cannabis. It's a plant that many Canadians use for health reasons. But what about the side effects? Jacqueline Smith is the Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. She says people really need to do proper research and educate themselves before even considering using cannabis.
You have to be a very informed consumer. You have to be very, very careful about the research. I can tell you that there's a lot of profiteering going on, and that panacea effect, there's people making a lot of money on products, topical as an example, creams for your skin. There's no strong evidence to suggest that these products are actually effective, but people are paying a lot of money for these products.
Professor Smith will have more on the pros and cons of using cannabis coming up after business news. Last weekend, a Lethbridge family suffered the loss of their 2 St. Bernards due to an alleged poisoning incident. We spoke to a local veterinarian here in town who shed some light on what you can do to keep your pets safe.
What you're looking for is anything out of the ordinary. When they're in the backyard, make sure your backyard is secure. do go out and police the backyard and keep them on leash, especially in areas that you're not familiar with. And if there are any suspicious signs, drooling, agitation, abnormal behavior, lethargy, that's where you'd want to call the ASPCA pet poison control line or get in touch with your local veterinarian.
A new program at the University of Lethbridge encouraging employment opportunities for students with disabilities is starting thanks to a large donation from CIBC. The CIBC Navigator program is a 5-year initiative that has been made possible thanks to a $250,000 gift. A spokesperson with the U of L says this donation will help students find jobs in their industry.
We're very excited to be able to take the donation from CIBC to be able to build toolkits for our students and for our employers' success. So we have been doing co-op here at the University of Lethbridge for quite a good amount of time, and for us to now be able to invest some resources into building inclusivity as well as the tools for our students with disabilities to be successful in the workplace is a tremendous opportunity we're very excited about.
One main benefit is that it is paid full-time work. So students get to earn competitive wages in different fields that they will be working in. Also, students are able to build all sorts of skills. So I find myself putting into practice my organizational skills, time management skills, technical skills, depending on the kind of job that the students will be doing.
The money is part of the U of L's Shine campaign, which encourages new partnerships with students to help them with their academic future. The City of Lethbridge has received recommendations on upgrades the Lethbridge Airport needs. City of Lethbridge Manager of Real Estate and Land Development, Michael Kelly, says it's all about ensuring long-term success for the airport.
The operational review turned up that the people, our staff out there are doing a great job. Some minor best practice improvements to happen out there. But as important was the pathway to the future. They gave us great food for thought. These guys have over 30 years experience managing airports all around the world, small and large. And they gave us some great ideas moving forward, but they also gave us the document moving forward, a step-by-step almost of how to be successful with our investments in the future.
After 22 years, the City of Lethbridge took over control of the airport from Lethbridge County in June of 2018. STARS Air Ambulance is a step closer to renewing its helicopter fleet after receiving a $1 million donation from Capital Power. The announcement was made earlier today at the Edmonton International Airport. In June of 2018, STARS unveiled a plan to replace its fleet with 9 new medically equipped Airbus H-145 helicopters at a cost of $13 million each. The $1 million donation will outfit the helicopter with the medical interior needed to perform emergency life-saving procedures. Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan says the decision by the Federal Court of Appeal to dismiss First Nations challenges of the TMX pipeline expansion affirms the Liberals' commitment to the pipeline.
I think that what's really important about today is to anybody who says that you can't get major projects built in this country, you can. You can if you roll your sleeves up and you work hard and you do it the right way. And this is an affirmation of that.
We're obviously pleased with the conclusion of the Federal Court of Appeal on the Trans Mountain project. You know, we see this project as one that will enable us to get our resources to international markets, something that will ensure that we can get a fair price for our resources.
Leaders from various BC First Nations say they will not stop fighting the Trans Mountain pipeline after the Federal Court of Appeal struck down their legal challenges. The court ruled that Canada engaged in meaningful consultation with First Nations, but the Indigenous leaders disagree.
Reconciliation stopped today. Right now, today. So we're standing here together in this little bit delay that we have in stopping this pipeline, because we're still trudging forward. We always said that we would do what it takes to make sure that we stop this pipeline. We have proven it's not in the best interest of our nations that are standing here, for Vancouver, for British Columbia, for Canada. This government is incapable of making sound decisions for our future generations. So we are and we will. Even for their children, we will take those steps to make sure that Canada stays the way it is.
The Liberal government has introduced legislation to ensure judges are trained in sexual assault law. It includes learning about rape myths and stereotypes. The proposed legislation revives a private member's bill originally put forward by Ronna Ambrose when she was the interim leader for the Conservatives.
You know, when I was at university many years ago, I worked on a project called Court Watch. where we had to sit in the courtroom and actually watch sexual assault cases and sexual abuse cases. And it was striking at the time, the discrepancy between the law as it appeared on paper and the law as it was applied in the courtroom. And that project actually led to recommendations that all judges should receive mandatory sexual assault law training. And in fact, to this day, that is still not happening.
An Alberta Conservative MP has apologized for asking a female MP whether she would ever consider sex work. The comment came during a debate in the House of Commons yesterday on the parole board's handling of a convicted murderer who was accused of killing a woman in Quebec City after he was given permission to visit sex workers while on parole. After Arnold Viersen addressed the House, Victoria NDP MP Laurel Collins urged him to listen to sex workers who were saying that sex is work. Viersen was booed when he responded by asking Collins if she would ever consider sex work. He said he was making the point that no woman in Canada ever chooses sex work, but later rose to apologize. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is still defending giving MasterCard $50 million to help set up a cybersecurity centre in Vancouver. Toronto journalist Brian Lilly says many Canadians still have a problem with it.
Nothing says helping the middle class quite like going to the World Economic Forum in Davos, where the millionaires and billionaires gather to talk about how we should run the whole world, and offering MasterCard, a company that earned $16 billion last year, $50 million. $50 million is a rounding error to them. They're not going to notice it any more than if you don't pay your full bill, Hal. So why are we giving them the money? When asked, Justin Trudeau just said, the middle class.
The head of the union representing Ontario's elementary school teachers says they were close to a deal before the government broke talks off last week. A spokesperson with the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario says government negotiators changed their position at the last minute and tabled proposals the unions could not accept.
I know that parents, students, ETFO educators, and we here at ETFO were very disappointed that contract talks between ETFO, the government, and school board associations were called off by the mediator last Friday. On behalf of our 83,000 members who are trying desperately to protect Ontario's world-class education system, we feel it's necessary to set the record straight on what led to the breakdown in talks. I want to be very clear that ETFO, school board associations, and the government were close to an agreement last Friday that would have been good for students, educators, and public education in this province. It would have ensured stability in public elementary schools this very week. Then late that day, the government's negotiators changed course and tabled impossible options they knew ETFO could not accept.
Students and staff on Fishing Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan are celebrating a very big event. They have a brand new school after teaching in trailers for 30 years. The kindergarten to grade 12 school has a gym, stage, fitness room, running track, and daycare. It replaces portables that had leaky pipes, exposed gas lines, and students in class wearing boots and jackets to keep warm. The $30 million building will accommodate 180 students. A pair of airline passengers from the United Kingdom will each spend time in jail and pay $100,000 after their unruly behavior forced their plane to land in Winnipeg last week. 25-year-old James Iotten and 34-year-old Natalie Walker pleaded guilty. They were on a flight from London to Los Cabos, Mexico, when they began threatening passengers and staff after drinking heavily. After airline staff restrained Iotten, the plane made an unscheduled stop in Winnipeg. It is there where police boarded the plane and arrested him. U.S. President Donald Trump had his State of the Union address yesterday. He used the time to make a case for his own re-election.
And our country is thriving and highly respected again.
Well, the biggest takeaway is we saw the president try to take credit for essentially making America great again, delivering on the promise of his campaign in 2016 as he gears up for his re-election in 2020. There are obviously things are a lot more complicated than he let on basically every single one of the issues that he took down. But the overarching message from the president really was that he has delivered on his promises as he tries to convince the American people to give him another term.
Our agenda is relentlessly pro-worker, pro-family, pro-growth, and most of all, pro-American.
Not a bad day today. We had sun mixed with cloud and some gusty winds. Some flurries, however, in the forecast. Jeanette Rocher will have weather details coming up in just a moment. Considering this is the first week of February, it's not bad temperature-wise, but some of the white stuff is on the way, possibly for the weekend. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details.
Yeah, well, actually, we are going to be seeing a 30% chance of showers turning to 30% chance of flurries after midnight tonight. Wind gusts, we could see up to 40 kilometers per hour after midnight as well. Into tomorrow, though, we're going to see a high of 3 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud and could get a bit windy as well. Looking ahead to the 5-day forecast, 1 degree is expected for Friday, and then we could see some flurries coming at us again on Saturday with a high of -3. 1 degree is the high for Sunday with lots of sunshine, and then it's going to climb to 4 degrees for Monday and drop to -1 on Tuesday with a chance of flurries next Tuesday as well. The average highs and lows for this time of year, 0 being the high, -12. The low, we're definitely staying in that range, and some days even a little bit higher. 18 was the high temperature on this day back in 1984, and back in 75 they had a very chilly -34 day. The sun rose this morning at 7:59 a.m. and it set at 5:32, and I'm definitely noticing the difference on the drive in the morning when I'm coming to work at 7 a.m. I'm seeing the lighter sky. On the west coast, we got some showers. 10 degrees is the high in Victoria. Vancouver, 7 degrees. 1 degree is expected up in Edmonton as well as Calgary. Edmonton should see some flurries though as well. This is for tomorrow. Saskatchewan will see some flurries tomorrow as well. Same thing for the rest of the prairies. -10 is the high in Saskatoon. -9 Regina, and Winnipeg should see a -11 day tomorrow. Lots of snow over there as well. Snow throughout the whole region here in Ontario and into Quebec. -2 is the high for Toronto tomorrow. Ottawa's high -5 and Montreal's high is -6. Looking further east, we're going to see a lot of snow as well in Atlantic Canada. -5 is the high tomorrow expected in Fredericton. -3 in Halifax, and Charlottetown also going to be seeing some snow, -5. St. John's will see a lovely -3 day, and they're about the only place in the country that isn't going to be seeing some snow tomorrow. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney spoke out about the Federal Court of Appeal's dismissal by Indigenous groups challenging Ottawa's approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Kenney says the project has been through years of environmental review and First Nations consultation.
The pipe has already been put in the ground on the Alberta side. I think this removes the last remaining legal obstacle to the completion of the Trans Mountain expansion. This has been through years of exhaustive reviews. The public supports it. Overwhelmingly, Aboriginal groups support it. The Cabinet has reviewed it twice and approved it. And now the courts have spoken yet again. Decision today said 129 First Nations groups were consulted, and at least 120 were in favor or not opposed.
Canada posted its smallest annual trade deficit last year since the last annual surplus was recorded in 2014. Stats Canada says it came in at $18.3 billion. Ottawa had a lower than expected deficit of $370 million in December. That was down from $1.2 billion in November and far below the $610 million economists had expected. Imports rose 0.2% last month, while exports were up 1.9%. It was boosted mainly by 18% increase in crude oil exports. TD Bank has lowered its posted 5-year fixed mortgage rate. Company official says it was to narrow the gap between the benchmark and special rates it offers customers. Banks maintain an official posted rate, but also offer lower rates through brokers that better reflect market conditions. TD cut its 5-year rate from 5.34 to 4.99% after lower funding costs pushed down the rates customers generally pay. TD's special rate stands at 3.09% or 3.11% with the annual carrying fees included. A food security task force in BC is recommending ways to use technology to support the agriculture sector. The findings include creating an agriculture partnership with colleges and universities and reviewing land use planning regulations to make sure the agri-tech sector has room to grow. The task force has asked for recommendations that support food security and growth of the agri-sector, focusing on technology, innovation, and profitability. The province's agriculture minister says the recommendations align with existing government initiatives. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 138 points on the day to 17,651. The Dow was up 483 points on the day to 29,290. The S&P 500 was up 37 points to 3334, and the Nasdaq was up 41 points to 9508. Oil rebounded from yesterday and was up $1.56 today to $51.17 per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to $1.87. Gold was up 9 cents to $15.56.11 an ounce, and silver was unchanged at $17.61 an ounce. Wheat is at $228 per metric ton, barley's at $229, canola's at $4.49, and corn is at $269 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 88 cents to $122.08. Feeder cattle were down $1.83 to $138.08. Lean hogs were up 35 cents to $57.98. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.28 US. We have some breaking news for you this hour. The U.S. Senate has acquitted U.S. President Donald Trump on impeachment charges. The charges stem from an alleged abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Republicans turned back an election year attempt by the House Democrats to remove him from office for pressuring a foreign power to incriminate his political rivals. The tally for conviction fell well below the 67-vote threshold necessary for removal. The Parliamentary Budget Office says Canadians will get back more than they pay when it comes to the federal carbon tax. Toronto journalist Brian Lilly says he doesn't buy what the feds are selling, and has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Wordbridge is hosting the second annual Lethbridge Writing Conference, taking place February 7th and 8th. The conference will feature Order of Canada recipient and award-winning author Robert J. Sawyer and local author Thorsten Nesch. Learn everything you want to know about writing from professional writers. For details about the full schedule, visit wordbridgeconference.com, and for tickets, visit eventbrite.ca. Come for a night of down-home fun to the Friends Winter Barn Dance on Saturday, March 7th, beginning at 7 p.m. at the Galt Museum and Archives. Wear your best Western hat and boots and dance the night away. Proceeds will go towards educational programs at the Galt. Tickets are $30 for adults, $20 for youth ages 11 to 17, and children 10 and under are free. Purchase yours by visiting galtmuseum.com. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at the Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 7 p.m. with small group sessions at 8, followed by coffee and dessert at 9. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau floated the idea of regulating news media and licenses, then quickly retreated. To talk more about this is Toronto journalist Brian Lilly. Brian, the PM received a lot of backlash, especially from the Conservatives, about trying to control the news. You know, what you and I do for a living.
Oh, absolutely. He was actually beaten up left and right over this. I mean, all sides were saying this is crazy. Now, it all started due to a report called, some call it the Yale Commission. That's after the last name of the woman that was heading up the commission. And it was on the future of broadcasting in Canada. And they said, you know what? We need to look at how CBC is funded. We need to look at how television stations like Bridge City News and Miracle Channel, how that's, regulated. And we need to look at all of this. And by the way, while we're at it, let's start regulating online news media. That would include everything from a website that puts up news stories to podcasters. It was absolute insanity, Hal. It was a major power grab in this report. And then on one of the Sunday talk shows, Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault, who's came out of the Greenpeace movement, he's an environmental radical, one of the rising stars in the Trudeau cabinet, some might say. He's asked about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, this sounds good. I agree with this, and here's how we'll do it." He didn't just say, "Well, we'll consider the report." He said, "Here's how we'll do it, and it'll be more stringent for bigger outlets, less stringent for smaller outlets." That was recorded on Friday, broadcast on Sunday, and by Monday morning, before 11 o'clock, he had completely recanted. Now, there's a couple of small things that make me worry. The Prime Minister, when asked about it in question period, said, well, we need to have credible news outlets. We need to have make sure that it's no misinformation. Look, during the election campaign, he referred to a report by Global Television that was about how DND was paying the provinces for our military personnel to get their health care. He described it as misinformation. By the end of the day, it was actually DND walking back and saying, yeah, we're not going to do it that way anymore. So Global was proven right. And of course, the Globe and Mail broke the story of the SNC-Lavalin, and I was there. It was almost a year ago to the day. I'm there with Justin Trudeau as he says, the allegations in the Globe are false. Well, of course, we found out they were true and then some. So the Prime Minister is on record many times calling out major media organizations, reputable media organizations, as misinformation, as fake news. Do we really want him deciding who gets a license and who doesn't based on how he feels about them? I don't think so.
The Prime Minister was still defending giving MasterCard $50 million to help set up a cybersecurity center in Vancouver. Now, getting $50 million in corporate welfare, Brian, priceless?
Oh, priceless indeed. Look, MasterCard bought a company called New Data, a Canadian outfit that is, experienced in cybersecurity, and they bought them up because they said, okay, look, we need to be heavy into cybersecurity. And look, you want your credit card company to be big into cybersecurity. So they buy this Canadian company, and then they say, we're going to invest $510 million into a new cybersecurity office in Vancouver. Well, while they're in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum, nothing says helping the middle class quite like going to the World Economic Forum in Davos, where the millionaires and billionaires gather to talk about how we should run the whole world, and offering MasterCard, a company that earned $16 billion last year, $50 million. $50 million is a rounding error to them. They're not going to notice it any more than if you don't pay your full bill, Hal. So why are we giving them the money? When asked, Justin Trudeau just said, the middle class. That was his answer over and over again. I don't know if he thinks that Ajay Banga, the CEO of MasterCard, is middle class because he only earned $20 million last year and has a net worth of about $260 to $270 million, or if he, really believes that subsidizing jobs with the private sector is the way to build the middle class. I don't think it is. It didn't work when his dad was in office, and it won't work now.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe are headed to Washington. But before that, Brian, Kenney is trying to sell Alberta in Montreal.
Yeah, he's doing full media tours. So, he was meeting with the Montreal Gazette editorial board. He's meeting with TVA, which is it's the most watched news, TV news outlet in Quebec. So being on that, big move for Jason Kenney to be out there, to get that kind of publicity. But it is part of him and the other premiers going down to Washington. That's the big part of Kenney's trip and the rest of them. They're going down to try and sell Canada to the governors. The National Governors Association holds their winter meeting this coming weekend in Washington, D.C. And by the way, later this year in April, they're coming up to Canada. Not all of them, but probably at least a dozen to 24 governors are going to come to Toronto with their staff on an infrastructure fact-finding mission. This is all good because essentially what the premiers are trying to do is say, look, there's these Buy American provisions that kind of block some of our companies. Can we find a way around it? Can we work together? The Buy American provisions are federal. They're from the Trump administration or previously from the Obama administration. Doesn't seem to matter who's president. They always have these protectionist measures. And the premiers are trying to talk to the governors and say, is there a way around it? Can we help each other out? Because in many cases, the states and the provinces are each other's number one trading partners. So this is a good thing for premiers Kenney, Moe, Legault, Ford for sure, and I can't remember who else is going, but those are the big guys.
Canada sent a plane to China to repatriate more than 300 Canadians. They'll be quarantined at CFB Trenton for a couple of weeks. Canada remains fairly stable when it comes to the coronavirus, with only 3 confirmed cases. I think 2 in Toronto. The couple is now recovering at home, and 1 in Vancouver.
Yeah, and then there's 1 in London, and she was a young woman who had been to Wuhan and was looking after her parents. It came back, went to the University of Western Ontario, and kind of self-isolated pretty quickly because she said, I'm not feeling well. She had mild symptoms. So overall, both the gentleman in Vancouver, the woman in London, and the woman in Toronto, they've all been able to self-recover at home. Only the man in his 50s, the first case that we ever heard about in Canada, had to be hospitalized, but he's home now. So fairly mild outbreak in Canada. We're recovering, but I think smart move both from a public relations and a public health perspective. from the federal government to say, look, we're going to bring home as many Canadians as we can on this flight. It's going to leave in the early hours of Thursday morning. That's Wuhan time. So we're talking, late Wednesday night, essentially. They're going to bring them home. They're going to go to CFB Trenton in Ontario. That's probably about an hour and a half east of Toronto. And then they're going to be quarantined there. There's an air cadet base that they're going to set them up at. And I'm having memories of my time as an Army cadet being out on those. Everyone's going to be given their own secure space and 14 days. You've got to be 14 days clear, and then you're allowed to go home.
Ipsos recently asked 1,000 Canadians about their views on the 4 candidates who are running for the Conservative leadership race. Now, Brian, Peter MacKay, Erin O'Toole, Marilyn Gladu, and Derek Sloan. Out of the 4, the majority said they would throw their support behind Peter MacKay. No surprise there, I guess.
Well, 40%. So 40% of those polled said, yeah, I'd consider voting Conservative if Peter MacKay was leading the party. You compare that to about 30% for both Erin O'Toole and Marilyn Gladu, about 29%, I believe is the number for Derek Sloan. Obviously, it puts Peter MacKay as the front runner if you follow the idea that I've heard espoused by many Conservatives. I'm looking for the most right-leaning candidate who can win. And if that's what your basis for voting is, then you're going to be looking at Peter MacKay much more closely than the others. He's had some hiccups. He's had some ups and downs over the past little while, but he does remain the front runner, and the rest are trying to scrape by, look for oxygen, look for ways to get in. There are some other smaller candidates trying to climb into the race, and hitting that first threshold, we'll see if they break through.
Now, speaking of Mr. MacKay, he said he was not happy picking on Trudeau and his yoga recently when he sent out a tweet through his iPhone, I guess. Now, didn't MacKay say, while Trudeau does his yoga, I like to play hockey?
Yeah, so during my interview with him before he did his big launch, he made that remark, because I asked him, I said straight up, look, people are saying, Peter MacKay is 54, Justin Trudeau's 48. That's not a big age gap between them. We're talking 6 years. And I said, people keep calling you yesterday's man compared to Justin Trudeau. And he said, look, people can judge me on my youthfulness. He does yoga. I play hockey. There was no nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Hey, he's effeminate, that sort of thing, which is how a lot of people took it. But after this tweet, a lot of people are saying Peter MacKay is trying to dog whistle to people and say, yoga means that you're effeminate, and if you do yoga, you're not a real man, and he's a real man. So MacKay, getting some of that backlash, says, I'm not happy with the tweet. We'll see if his communications and his online team stay in place, or if he does a shakeup in the middle of the campaign. I'm not sure he has to. He's still the front runner, but he may end up doing that. We shall see.
Apparently, when you perform yoga as well, you loosen up, limber up, and you play better hockey too, so maybe you should consider both.
This is what I've heard.
The former interim leader of the federal Conservatives, Rona Ambrose, is joining Liberal ministers, that's right, Liberals, to introduce a bill that looks similar to her legislation requiring judges to get training in sexual assault law. Brian, she says it is above anything political.
Yeah, so this is called Bill C-5. So it's a government bill this time, but it is very similar. Not exactly the same, but very similar to a private member's bill that Rona Ambrose tabled when she was interim Conservative leader. And she said, look, we have a horrible track record of actually prosecuting people successfully when it comes to sexual assault. One of the problems is that, in her view, is that judges aren't properly trained in sexual assault law. So she wanted to look at this. She wanted to examine it. She wanted to make sure they all had training. The bill didn't pass all the way through Parliament before the election back in October. So the government said, you know what, we're going to take this up. My guess is how this is going to pass with multi-party support. I don't expect a lot of pushback on this. Maybe there'll be some tweaking on small issues, but I think overall this is going to get wide support from the parties.
All united, absolutely. Brian, the Parliamentary Budget Office says Canadians will get back more than they pay when it comes to the carbon tax. Now, haven't we heard this song and dance before?
Yeah, well, they say they'll get back more than they pay, but not as much as the government claims. And part of that is something that I pointed out, which is that, well, depending on where you live, you're going to be paying the GST or the HST. So you're in Alberta. You don't have a provincial sales tax. So you're looking at a 5% GST that will be applied on top of the carbon tax. So, take the carbon tax, add 5%. That's going to reduce what the government says you will get back because there's no way around paying that tax. Here in Ontario, it's 5% federal sales tax, 8% provincial sales tax, so it's 13%. And of course, in other provinces, it goes up and down depending on where you live. So the PBO said it's not going to be as much as the government claims, but they'll still get back more. Now, I still look at this and I say I don't buy it because both the PBO and the government numbers look at averages. And so, look, I live in downtown Toronto. I no longer own a car. I used to have a car. I drove quite a bit. Now I'm in downtown. I walk everywhere. I take the subway. Guess what? I'm not spending a lot on gas, Hal. So, but I'm still worked into the average. If you live in your average Canadian suburb, you are driving an awful lot of places. You're putting a lot of gas into the tank. Well, you take my zero and you're a lot and, find an average on them. It starts to say, well, you're going to pay a lot more than I am. And that's part of the problem with the way the government has devised this tax. So if you're your average suburban Canadian, you're still going to be paying more than what the government claims. You're going to be paying more than you will ever get back.
Here's a nice little story. A World War II veteran, Fred Arsenault, who turns 100 years of age on March 6th, wants to receive 100 birthday cards before he becomes the big 100, Brian.
Yeah, so he turns 100 on March the 6th, and he was a private in the Second World War. He was part of the Italian campaign. He was in Normandy at various points and received letters from the home front while he was on the war front. He wants to get 100 cards. So this, I guess, went back to an American vet who was about to turn 100 last year and put out a similar call. He decided, hey, I like that idea. He's received retweets on this from Toronto Mayor John Tory, from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, from myself, and let's hope he gets it. He lives in this, still lives in this small, cute little post-war bungalow out in Scarborough in Toronto's East End, and he is looking forward to getting as many birthday cards as he can get when he turns 100. I can only recall my grandmother turning 100 about a dozen years ago, and it warmed her heart for all the well wishes that she got, which at that point, I was able to take all the way to Scotland. Greetings from Prime Minister Stephen Harper back then.
Wow. Toronto journalist and one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Now that cannabis is legal in Canada, more people are using it for health reasons. How effective is it, and what are some of the health risks associated with it? Joining me now to talk about it via Skype from Calgary is Professor Jacqueline Smith, Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. Jacqueline, welcome to BCN.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
So what are some of the benefits of using cannabis for medical treatment? I know some people use it for pain relief. Are there other potential benefits?
Well, what I do want to say, cannabis has been around for a long time, but because it was an illegal product for so long, there was minimal research. So we are starting to do some research, but it is still in the early phase. What we do know that is cannabis now is being recommended for pain associated with palliative care. So those who are, again, palliative. Also for nausea and vomiting in relation to chemotherapy, for spasticity, for multiple sclerosis. And just recently, in the last couple of years, it's now being used for treatment-resistant epilepsy in children.
Wow. I have members of my family who are seniors who like to use it for their fibromyalgia and their osteoarthritis. Your thoughts?
Well, cannabis is a very complex compound, and there's lots of different cannabinoids associated with that. So I think the research right now is very, very interesting because they're starting to isolate some of those compounds. And I have heard in research that there is an anti-inflammatory property to it. My caution is, again, this is early research. And you have to have a really critical eye when you're looking at research, because some research, they do it with small participants, number of participants. Some research is not being replicated. We're not seeing random control trials as well too. So I'm concerned there's a little bit of a panacea effect right now, and where cannabis is being recommended for everything under the sun. Now, I want to position myself as someone who sits on the fence. On a personal level, I can tell you that one of our daughters was treated for a cannabis use disorder. And, but also my father, who's passed away from cancer, used cannabis for pain control. So, again, I think we have to be very cautious. I am a researcher. We did some research with students at the University of Calgary, and we do know that many young people are using cannabis, and they're saying that it's effective for their anxiety, for their depression, and for their sleep and for their pain. And we don't deny the fact that people are experiencing positive effects, but what we're saying is that also alongside the positive is the potential for risk, because we don't know the long-term consequences of someone who's using a product over a long period that has not been thoroughly researched.
And I've heard students as well, they like to use cannabis and the cannabis oil when they're vaping and their vaping products. But let's talk more about the larger or more growing demographic, and you say it might be seniors?
Yes, we are seeing a rise in the senior population using cannabis. I, again, caution, because when you look at some of the effects, the side effects of cannabis use, it can cause some coordination problems, some dizziness. So we do worry about seniors who are using cannabis and may be at risk for falls, not to insult any of their intelligence, but I think what's really important is that when you are seeing a healthcare practitioner, so we have physicians and nurse practitioners who can prescribe it. So when you're seeing them, you want to be sure that they are thorough in going over the side effects and the potential risks, the potential benefits, and looking at some of the contraindications as well for people who are wanting to use cannabis. And there are some, if there's a family history of psychoses or just substance use problems, that is a concern. And of course, very, very strong evidence with cannabis use with those who have a predisposition, again, towards psychoses or schizophrenia. That's very thorough research, and we know that people are at high risk of psychoses or schizophrenia as well if they have a family history of either of those.
So what is it in the cannabis itself, doctor, that provides pain relief? Is it the THC, the CBD?
That's a very, very good question, and one that we really emphasize now when we're educating our university students. A lot of people don't understand that cannabis is, the two main components are THC and CBD. Now, THC is a psychoactive, mind-altering substance, whereas CBD is non-intoxicating. So most of the research, I actually read a systematic review today in preparation for this interview, and it's 2020 January. And what they're saying is that most of the research now is favoring CBD as a potential substance that can help with things like we're talking about with pain. There's some early research around anxiety as well, social anxiety. I did see research connected to PTSD and to sleep disorders that are associated with PTSD. So again, I'll caution, all of those studies that I just shared with you are early. So again, we have to be very careful when we're looking at the research. The ones that we talked about at the beginning for palliative pain, for spasticity, for the nausea and vomiting, and for the treatment-resistant epilepsy, solid research. But the others that we're talking about now, we have to be careful with.
When I talk to chefs about cooking, a lot of times they say, Hal, the best way to release the lycopenes in the tomatoes is when you cook them instead of eating them raw. And I thought that was interesting. Is it very similar when it comes to cannabis, that people actually smoke the cannabis as opposed to edibles to get the most bang for their buck, so to speak?
Well, that again, you're just bringing up some really great questions. So there's a difference between smoked and edible. One is the effect. So when you smoke or vape, typically you're starting to see an effect within 10 minutes that peaks at 30 minutes. With edibles, sometimes it takes up to 30 minutes to feel the high if you're using the THC, and then that sometimes takes up to 4 hours to peak. So the problem is those who are accustomed to getting that quick high from the smoked cannabis and are then trying the edible, let's say, as an example, they'll eat a brownie and within 10 minutes, they're waiting for that high that they normally get from something that was smoked, and they'll eat another one and another one. So that is a concern. In fact, we are seeing data out of Colorado where there's increased visits to emergency now because of intoxicating effects. So basically overdosing on cannabis, and you would see things like psychoses, increased heart rate, paranoia, definitely concerning symptoms. And again, the concern with the edibles is that now we're dealing with children, with pets, and the caution is if we're making an informed decision as adults to use it, we have to be very, very careful with our children who may be curious, or with our pets who just may eat something that fell on the floor. So
Yeah, I'm wondering how dangerous that would be for, like you said, your pet or your child, a baby, a toddler, to get a hold of some of the edibles. How toxic that may actually be, how dangerous.
Well, and again, a good point. It can absolutely be dangerous. When we're talking about THC, we're talking about a psychoactive, mind-altering substance. And for pets as well, we're seeing more research where vets are seeing animals coming in with intoxication as well from cannabis products. So I think what's really important to bring out as well is that there's different concentrations of THC in different products. So they can have a level of up to 99% THC, whereas you can get as low as 4 and 5%. On average, we're looking between 30 and 40 concentration levels of THC. So it's, again, I hope what's coming across here is that you have to be a very informed consumer. You have to be very, very careful about the research. I can tell you that there's a lot of profiteering going on, and that panacea effect, there's people making a lot of money on products, topical as an example, creams for your skin, there's no strong evidence to suggest that these products are actually effective, but people are paying a lot of money for these products. Is there potential for research to prove that they're helpful? Absolutely. But my line is that I think we're flying a plane as we're building it. So we have to be very careful, and you have to know that you can trust your healthcare practitioner. Again, that they're doing all the screening questions, they're giving you the risks and the benefits. There's no really standardized dosaging right now as well too. So what they're saying is you want to start low and you want to go slow. And for those who maybe are used to smoking cannabis and are switching over to the edibles, they have to realize they are not going to get the effect as immediate as they would with the inhaled. So there's so many different variables to consider, again, if you're making the decision to use.
One of the stories we had on Bridge City News last week was down in the United States, how people are using CBD oil on their pets, like their dogs, saying how it's helping with their pain and their suffering. What are your thoughts on that, using it on our pets?
I think, again, in all areas of cannabis research, it's new. I do research with humans, so I just know that that's another area that we have to be very cautious with. And again, I think there's a potential for profiteering from promoting a substance that's effective when in fact it hasn't been thoroughly researched.
Some say cannabis is not addictive at all, but others say it really can be. What does the science say?
The science says there's absolutely a diagnosis for a cannabis use disorder, and it's found in the diagnostic manual of mental health disorders, and absolutely. And I've actually seen the comparison between coming off of cannabis as coming off cigarettes. So there is that withdrawal as well. There's definitely the tolerance as well, where people are starting with smaller concentrations and having to go higher with THC as well, toxic levels to get the benefits. So all the same symptoms of other substance use disorders. And I can definitely tell you, I'm also a clinician who has worked in the area of addiction and mental health, and I've absolutely seen cannabis use disorder amongst youth. And youth is an area that we need to be very, very cautious with, because we know that the brain continues to develop up to the age of 25, even 26. So while the brain is still developing, our youth are at a greater risk of problematic use because of their developing brain. And the research says that the earlier you start and the more frequent you use, the more risk you are of creating cannabis use disorder or problematic cannabis use. So I think a lot of research, especially from the Canadian Centre of Substance Abuse, they're putting out a lot of literature around caution with young people. And again, we know they're using, in fact, Canadian youth are among the top youth in the world who are smoking cannabis. So we're paying particular attention right now to that.
Are there any potential problems if you consume cannabis edibles along with alcohol or maybe some medications?
Absolutely. We are definitely seeing, if you're consuming alcohol and cannabis, you can potentiate the effect of those two. We do know that we've done a lot of work around impaired driving with alcohol. We're also now having to move forward and look at impairment from cannabis use. And I think we're having to re-educate our young people, because what we do know is the fact that the government has, Health Canada has legalized cannabis. We know now that the perceived risk for young people is going down, and we're seeing a reciprocal effect with that too. So as the perceived risk goes down, use is going up. So the message to a lot of young people is, well, it's legalized, it can't be that bad. So we're really having to do the education again around the CBD, the THC, around the developing brain as well too. And what I do know that our young people are smart and they want to know what the science is saying. So I think we need to teach our young people to make informed decisions. And I think, again, there's a lot of really good research. Canada's lower risk cannabis use guidelines. It's a harm reduction approach. But again, it's giving all the information. It's saying, if you choose to use, these are the things that you should be aware of. So again, giving people the respect and dignity to make the decision and to make it in an informed way as well.
And another thing, when we were talking about some of the long-term detriments or the effects of using cannabis, when you go to the Canada-US border and you want to enter the United States, they ask, have you ever had cannabis? Have you ever smoked pot? If you say yes, good luck getting into the United States right now. That's another danger.
It's true. It's true. I mean, Canada has legalized it federally, and you're seeing across many states in the US, they have legalized it in some states, but they have not across the country. So they're protecting their people. I appreciate that.
Professor Jacqueline Smith, Director of Mental Health and Wellness in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. Thanks for your time today.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.